Hello and good afternoon, friends. Welcome to the CEC-UGC live lecture. Dear friends, as you know that from time to time we talk on different subjects, different topics, so that it becomes easier for you to study your course material as well as get in-depth knowledge of the things around you. So dear friends, in this session today we are going to discuss on a very interesting topic, and the topic is parliamentary form of government. As well as we are going to discuss the theory and practices in India, that how the parliamentary form of government is practiced in India. And dear friends, for this very discussion, we have again with us in our studios Dr. Sushila Kaushik. Dr. Kaushik is a retired professor from Department of Political Science, University of Delhi. I believe that her immense experience would help us in knowing this very topic, very subject, that is parliamentary form of government. And of course, we are going to talk in the context of India too. So, I would like to welcome our guest, Dr. Sushila Kaushik. Ma'am, welcome to the EDISET lecture once again.
Thank you so much. I thought what we can do today is not only see what type of government do we have, but also see some of the arguments, debates and discussions which have gone on around in India over our form of government and the governance in the past 60 years or so. Because it's one thing to do it in the constitutional, institutional form. It is also at the same time very interesting to see how it is practiced, what are the running controversies in our practices in India. So, we will focus mainly on India, but what we will do is a little comparison with some other government which has a different form of government. Say let us take United States, which has a presidential form of government, while majority of the Commonwealth countries like Britain and those who were under the British colonial rule, by and large we had started with the British model, namely parliamentary form of government. The issue is, did we follow this parliamentary form of government where our founding fathers who were in the Constituent Assembly and who had been trained or had been practicing law in the British colonial, during the British colonial times, whether they were only influenced by the British and they had only that model in front of them, or whether they consciously discussed and debated and agreed that the parliamentary form of government was in many ways better than the presidential form of government. Because we had in front of us in 1947, when we became independent, two different models of government, what was practiced by Britain and what was practiced by the United States. The United States, when it became a constitution, when it became independent, adopted a constitution, very clearly rejected the British model, because to them the British model spelled an unstable democracy, one which keeps moving or one which is not really effective or very efficient. They, in the name of a stable and efficient democracy and governance, they adopted the presidential model, which they really for the first time invented for themselves. So, we have these two models in front of us and we needed to adopt one perhaps. So, we adopted, for us it sounded, the British parliamentary form of government was much better than the presidential form of government. Why is it? Why is it? What were the values which we had adopted, which made us prefer the parliamentary form of government? We believed in definitely a democracy, so also the United States did, and in this democracy which we had, whose values, whose various aspects we really had learned and perhaps in a way inherited from the British model, the British experience, where we learned the various values of democracy like equality and rights, liberty. These are things which we learned during our colonial period. We came to believe that when we form our own government, there should be people's participation. The widest scope should be given to a people's participation, because our independence also came through a very widely participated national movement in India. So, the citizens' rights, citizens' participation is something which we kept before us as an important ideal, for which there were very many requirements, but one very important requirement is people participate in the election of the government as much as possible directly. Since we cannot adopt a direct participation in view of our size and the number of population, we did have to adopt what you call an indirect democracy. But even in this indirect democracy, the formation of the government had to come by a representation by the people. So, people will choose the representatives who in turn will form the government. But having formed the government, these representatives should continue to be under the watch of the people. They cannot just have a stable democracy for 5 years or 4 years. We are in the positions and we are ruling. Citizens keep quiet for the next election. That was not really the type of a democracy we wanted to have. We wanted the citizens to have a constant say. Constantly they may coming out with their views, and in case they are unhappy about it, say it very openly, and in case there is a need for changing the government, also change the government even in the middle of the electoral period. Namely, if the ruling party is not performing very well, we should have the option of having another party who will come forth and change the ruling party and make the government hopefully better. This is possible only in a parliamentary form of government, where you have a ruling party and you have an opposition group or opposition party and opposition leaders. So, if the ruling party and its leaders do not perform well, we have a choice. We can call the other set of people to come and perform. This is not there in a presidential form of government. Once a president is chosen, once a senate is chosen, once a house of representatives is chosen, then they continue to be in power for 4 years in an American experiment. So, this is one of the very important reasons why India preferred to have a parliamentary form of government, so that you have a ruling party and an opposition party, or a ruling group and an opposition group, and we can choose the alternate in case we want to have it. So, though it was indirect democracy, because of this representation, we had this direct democratic participation in spite of not only choosing the representatives. So, we find that in this sort of experiment which we had, the basic thing is how exactly the indirect democracy can lead to a sort of a control over the government by the population. So, if this has to be done, then we have to have certain types of institutions like elections. So, we have elections once in 5 years, but normally, but if need be, we can also have elections before that. We can have mid-term elections, we can have elections in 4 years time or 3 years time. We do not have to wait till all the 5 years is completely over. Though there is a constitutional restriction, we do not extend the elections beyond period of 2 years. That is only under very extreme emergency conditions. Normally, we should stick to the 5-year rule, but if need be, if there is a performance of a government is bad or whatever happens, then we can even call an election earlier. So, this flexibility in our arrangement is possible in a parliamentary form of government, which definitely is not adopted in the presidential form of government. So, what we thought was, once again, what is considered as instability in other cases, we called it as opportunities for the people to form the government as or change the government as and when they want to. So, then we divided the functions of our government into the 3 important functions: legislative, executive and judicial. So, what we divided the functions into these 3, so also in presidential form of government, but the distinction between the 2 we will see very soon is there the 3 are in 3 different compartments with separate identity, separate autonomy, totally compartmentalized in a rigid form. In a parliamentary form of government, though they have divided the functions into 3 basic compartments and given to 3 different organizations or organs, we still keep a certain amount of active and reactive and interactive type of relationship among these 3 organs in the government. Once again, a certain amount of flexibility, certain amount of an organic relationship, certain amount of opportunity to use in case there is a need in the future. So, we will see this a little more very soon. So, there is what you call an intra-governmental relationship. That is between legislature, executive and judiciary. We have worked out quite a few types of interactions and relationship. So, even though there is an executive and legislature, we find the legislature and executive in the case of a parliamentary form of government is very close. The executive is part of the legislature because we choose our cabinet, we choose our prime minister, we choose our ministers from among the members of the legislature. So, there is an extremely close organic link between the executive and legislature, namely a small committee of the legislature almost becomes our executive. So, the legislature can control it, change it, reformulate it, and ask us to come back and make somebody else take over the executive function is possible in a parliamentary form of government. In a presidential form of government, the compartmentalization is complete, is rigid. The legislature and executive have no relationship whatsoever. Each one is assertive of its own independence and autonomy, except in a very short place. In the rest of the places, they really exist as parallel and not interfering with each other, though may be unhappy about each other. So, the intra-governmental relationship between one section, one organ, one set of functions of the government with another one is very organic relationship in the parliamentary form of government. Maybe these are all the various types of actual institutional parameters which really helped our forefathers to choose a parliamentary form of government, because in their own wisdom, for a long time to come in India, we should have this sort of a flexible parliamentary democracy where the citizens can watch, citizen can understand, citizen can act, citizen can change in case there is any needed changes in our governmental formation or governmental constitution. So, parliamentary form of government by many people are believed to be more liberal, more democratic, more responsible to the people of the country, who in turn chose the government as sent their representatives to run the day-to-day affairs of the government. So, this is much more citizens' participation. In this form of government then we have various types of roles and agencies which we are given to ourselves. We do have these three important ones: legislative, executive and judicial, which is more like a compartment sort of separation of the functions of the government into three main features, which is universally accepted in all forms of government. And each one of them have their own roles and their own limitations and their own responsibilities to follow, which is normally known to us. Then we have the interaction between what we call intra-government, within the government relationship with each other. For instance, in the parliamentary, as I said, parliamentary form of government, we have a lot more scope for interaction. In a presidential form of government, there is a lot less scope for interactions. Over a period of time, in the presidential model of United States or those who follow them, we have very little interaction, and that interaction is also not really one of responsiveness or questioning as much as one of checking and balancing. We have the concept of checks and balances in presidential form of government. Each one of them has a separate identity, each one of the organs have separate independent roles, but too much of autonomy and too much of independence to each one may someday lead to a point where they may be exceeding their powers, exceeding their limit and doing harm to the democracy model or efficiency model or to the interest of the state. So, then they have invented over a period of time an institution called checks and balances. There is a separation of powers, but along with the separation of powers, the presidential form of government has over a period of time evolved what they call checks and balances. So, that one part of the government checks the other part of the government. It watches and controls the other part of the government, so that finally it is able to balance them. So, that neither executive nor legislature becomes too much for the other one to run the country. So, even though American government is sometimes criticized as very autocratic because the president is very autonomous, there are certain types of checks which they have adopted over a period of time, like when the president appoints various functionaries, including the members of the cabinet on his own, and there are about 5,000 positions in the United States where their new president appoints 5,000 people, either confirms it, continues them, or reappoints them, or appoints fresh people. There are some posts which are so important that those appointments have to be ratified by the Senate, that is the upper house of the legislature. So, even if the president has authority to choose, nominate and appoint, there is a Senate which gets into and does what you call hearings. It questions, it makes the particular person appointed to come before it and answer the questions which they are raising. So, unless the Senate approves their appointment, the president cannot appoint them. So that the wrong type of persons do not get appointed to various positions is something which the Senate keeps for itself as its power. So, this is what we call checks and balances. Once again, the American president is very autonomous to fight war. He is the commander in chief. He is the one who takes all the decisions. All the army chiefs are all responsible to him. But the American president can be in the danger of declaring a war because he wants to do and he becomes very powerful. No. The House of Representatives is the authority which can declare a war. An American president cannot declare a war or join a war on his own because of the circumstances requiring it. For instance, the First World War. The Woodrow Wilson was the president. They really wanted to get into the war because Europe was being ravaged by the Axis powers. Britain, France were trying to, at that time Russia, were trying to struggle against them. But he couldn't bring the United States into the war at all because he had to go to the House of Representatives to get the permission to join the war. The House won't give it. The American population did not want to join the war. They wanted to believe in an isolationist posture, as they call themselves. The same is true about the Second World War. Once again, the American public, the American House of Representatives, the popular opinion did not like United States joining the war, which they considered as a European war. So, you have Germany, France and later on Japan joining it as one side, and you have Britain, France and Soviet Union on the other side, but Americans just did not join the war, even though Hitler and Mussolini and the fascist forces were running across Europe and damaging all the various countries. Finally, the United States could join the war only when in Pearl Harbor, Japanese attacked a ship of the United States where they lost their lives. So, with the result, then the American public opinion was roused, and then they said, no, now we must get into the war and teach a lesson to the Japanese because they attacked our ship and killed our people. So, the famous Pearl Harbor attack then could bring the Americans into the war. So, for that thing, you have to go back again to House of Representatives and get their support. So, the declaration of war, America joining the war, is something which only the House could do, not the President could do. So, this is a sort of a check against the President, once again given by over a period of time by the House of Representatives. So, Americans have also over a period of time adopted certain institutions like checks and balances, like consultation with the Senate or declaration of war, which acts as a check on the other organs. So, even though they are all very autonomous, extremely limited to their own roles, but this has come in as a necessity in practice. In the case of a parliamentary form of government like ours, these things are not there because our executive is part of our legislature. And so, the executive cannot do anything unless it is approved by the legislature. So, we have what you call the cabinet form of government, where we base ourselves on what we call collaboration and coordination and cooperation. Unless the executive and legislature cooperate with each other, unless the executive goes to Parliament and declares its policies or any other measures, it has to put it before the Parliament and gets its approval. Then only it can come out with a new important policy. And the Parliament can make the executive come out with and make a statement on any issue where the Parliament feels highly agitated about. So, every other day we see in our Parliament adjournment motions, notice being given to the government to come and talk about any issue which the parliament believes is an important issue for the country. They can hold on to ransom the cabinet or its ministers for anything which they do wrong. This is where we call by way of a responsibility to the parliament. Our cabinet, which is our executive, is responsible to our parliament. We call it collective responsibility. The cabinet as a whole is collectively responsible to the parliament, which really chooses them. Because the prime minister of our country is the leader of the lower house. When you say leader of the lower house, it means leader of the entire house. In order to make this entire house, we go through an election, we have a majority party leader becoming the party leader of the entire house. So, we call the prime minister as the leader of the house, and so the leader of the house in turn can choose the cabinet, but this cabinet has to come from within the legislature. He cannot go and choose anybody from anywhere. They have to be a member of the legislature, either house of the legislature, or become a member within a period of 6 months by contesting the election. So, they have to be an MP before or after becoming a minister, which means this whole cabinet committee will be part of the legislature and be collectively responsible to the legislature for any policy adopted or any policy failed. And if the parliament believes the majority wise that the cabinet is not performing, it can pass what you call a vote of no confidence against the cabinet. So, if it succeeds, then the cabinet comes down. So, and a new cabinet can be formed by another alternate leader in our parliament. This is a very, very close relationship. It is a very close coordination, very close collaboration. Sometimes an individual minister may commit some sort of an action which is not considered very conducive to democracy or even to his own ethical standards. Scam, corruption, or murder or some other crime, which if an individual cabinet minister, the minister as such, performs, then he is individually responsible to the parliament. Then he has to resign. If the parliament really raises an uproar over him, then he or she will have to resign. So, both collectively as well as individually, the council of ministers are responsible to the parliament. They are accountable to the parliament. The parliament can just bring them down. This is the other form of checks and balances, much more active, much more day to day, which the parliamentary form of government has it as a part of it. With the result, we believe that the parliamentary form of government is much more responsive, accountable, transparent and democratic. Why was this created? How did it come up? It is mainly because of two types of political theorists really had a lot of impact on the formation of the governments and the nature of the governments. They influenced very much the American government formation in 1773 when they were trying to have their constitution being framed. Most important of them is Montesquieu. Montesquieu was a Greek philosopher who very much believed in the institutionalization, very much believed in these three functions being separated and three functions being kept separate, autonomous and checked, limited, delimiting their functions. Because he believed if any autocratic ruler normally combines all the three, he makes the rules, he implements the rules and he punishes himself. In the sense, he does not punish himself if he really does not follow the rule. So, this he thought was a concentration of all powers in the hands of one person. So, to prevent this sort of an autocracy or dictatorship, Montesquieu proposed separating these three functions and giving it to three different agencies. Because otherwise, the person who makes the laws implements it and then becomes a magistrate in making the judgments on the same thing is sure passport to autocracy and dictatorship, which is what many monarchies in ancient world had it. It is out of Montesquieu's theory of separation of powers that Americans formed their government. Keeping the same thing in view, the parliamentary government evolved itself over a period of time. The other important political scientist who talked about is Lord Acton, a more modern democratic person, who said power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So, if you give all the power in the hands of one person, they will become definitely absolute power, and that would make them demagogue, dictator, ruthless autocrat. So, the power has to be limited. Power cannot be just given to one person and we do not look into it. So, the parliamentary form of government, the British model, began distributing these powers among 3 different organs, so that nobody has absolute powers in their own hands. So, these are some of the ideas over a period of time which has very much governed the formation of government and how to promote democracy. It is not just a question of autocratic power, but also becomes then the people's power, people's responsibility, people's participation and people's rights as such. So, the absolute power goes against people's rights and the democracy as such. That is where there has been enormous efforts at formation of government in controlling the absolute power of the government. That is a very important aspect of the political science as such, how to not only how to give a power into how to govern, but how not to give too much power, so that the government does not exceed its limit and does not make life of the people ultimately very cruel or suppressed. So, the concept of checks and balances, which is followed either in the United States or those countries which follow the American model, and the ideas of theories of autonomy, responsibility and accountability, all of them have figured when we are thinking in terms of forming the institutions in our countries, in the world. Very few, only under the military powers, military dictatorships, which Pakistan had for a long time, Burma had for a long time, Latin America keeps having every now and then. Those are the regimes, or in Africa, that where we found all the powers are concentrated in the hands of one person or one group, a military junta, which is not really for the people's welfare at all. So, this is important discussions, we all have it. So, when we have this American president model or the British parliamentary model, we have various types of functions which have been given to various organs. We essentially saw both the Congress and the president in the United States, or the president, the executive and the legislature. There is also a third one, namely the judiciary. So, for instance, the House of Representatives in the United States or in Britain or in India or elsewhere has a very important role when it comes to financial bills, because finance concerns the country, it concerns the future of the country. Anybody can take away the finance and run away. So, with the result, the financial bills, namely the budget and other types of money allocation, always gets initiated only at the representatives, House of Representatives, which is directly chosen by the population in the elections. So, control of finance is usually given to the lower house everywhere, and if the financial bill is defeated in a parliamentary form of government, namely if the budget is defeated in a parliamentary form of government, the government has to go. The government will have to resign, because it is equivalent to a vote of no confidence in the government. It is given that much importance, namely the finance of the country. Anyway, the third organ we have is the judiciary. How is judiciary related to the rest? As far as possible, the judiciary has been kept a little away from the other two, because judiciary ultimately is the interpreter of the Constitution, the guardian of the Constitution, the guardian of all the rights which have been given to the people by the Constitution, guardian of entire democracy, democratic operations, democratic values in any country. So, we believe in keeping the judiciary insulated. This insulation, separation for the judiciary, comes mainly because of two concepts, namely the independence and autonomy of the judiciary. By keeping the judiciary autonomous from others and not allowing others to interfere with the judiciary, we have been able to maintain the dignity, the status and the autonomy of the judiciary. The other way in which we are able to keep the independence of the judiciary is by way of who appoints them. How do they get appointed? what is the nature of their salary, who fixes their salary, who pays their salary, what is the age of retirement, how do they retire. These are all various issues about judiciary which has been very often kept above the executive, above the judiciary, above the legislature. For instance, in the United States, the president appoints the judges, definitely, but does not take it before the parliament, before the Senate. The Senate cannot question the judicial appointments because that is a very sacred sphere, they should not make it very light-hearted. But once appointed, the American judiciary, judges of the Supreme Court will not retire till they are alive. That is, it is a lifelong post, unless the judge himself, either because of his own reasons, because of his health, or because of something else, resigns. So, we have American presidents resigning, saying now it is too much, I have been here too long, my health does not permit, I would like to enjoy life. So, if he resigns on his own. So, no Senate or no president can really dismiss an American judge, nor can he send him on to retirement. In the case of India, we have definitely fixed a certain age limit for the judiciary, namely 65. When they attain the age of 65, the judges retire. Before that, usually judges are not removed. We have not had any case of a judge being removed either here or in the United States by a normal means, by the president who appoints them. If the judge has to be removed, it has to be by a very special process for reasons which are far beyond the normal procedures, namely by an impeachment process. This impeachment process, both in India as well as United States, is made so difficult that it will be only rarely adopted by the country against a judge. There also the proceeding has to start with one of the two houses, pass through that, then go to the other house, pass through that, then only it comes to the president of the country for impeachment proceedings. It is so devious that we have not adopted any time any such procedure. In the case of United States, one judge almost came up to that limit, but then it was not done because it is a bad precedent, it will become a bad tradition. Same is true in the case of India, one judge was called upon, but it was not taken to that final point because it will ruin the tradition of our judiciary's independence. So, the judiciary is considered as a very independent organization and its independence is assured by the constitution. The president appoints the judges, but then the president cannot in any way remove the judges. Nobody can get into the changing the salary level of a judge. And so, the salaries remain intact and the salaries do not come from legislature or budget or financial ones, it comes from what you call a consolidated amount which cannot be touched by any finance minister of any government in our country. And so, in various ways the president's, the judiciary's independence has been assured, so that the judiciary can perform its role without any insecurity, without any fear, without having to obey the existing government, without any bias, and exercise themselves very, very independently. Thereby, the judiciary really becomes an authority over the other two bodies. In the case of United States, for instance, we also have an institution called judicial review. Judicial review means any act passed by the legislature or by the president in the United States can come up for review by the judiciary if somebody appeals to it, and the judiciary can call it null and void if it finds it objectionable or going against the constitution or the spirit of the constitution. So, that power has been given to judiciary. It is a part of again a check and balance in the United States, that the judiciary can call any policy, any law, any act by the other two organs as null and void or unconstitutional or anti-constitutional, and that is called judicial review. In the case of India, we do not have the judicial review because our parliamentary founding fathers did not want to give that power to the judiciary, but what we have is a procedure established by law. Namely, there are procedures by which an act or a policy has to be made. a law has to be passed, and if that procedure is adopted and done properly, then the judiciary will have to uphold that. If the process is violated somewhere, that in the house there are so many stages in which you pass a bill, for which there are so many criterion conditions, if those have not been adopted at any particular point, then the Supreme Court can come down and say null and void, because it has not followed the proper procedure. Even in an ordinary case like, say, selection committee of a teacher, promotion of a teacher, which we all talk about, there the procedure has to be followed very correctly. If the procedure is followed very correctly in both spirit and letter, then you cannot call any appointment as a null and void. If there is any lacuna in the procedure, then the Supreme Court can call that appointment as void. So, this is the limitation we have put on our judiciary, so that the judiciary does not call anything and everything as unconstitutional, but only goes by the procedure which has been established by them as the proper way of doing things by the constitution itself. So, this is a limit we have, but we also have very many times our judiciary, Supreme Court, has called many legislations passed by our legislatures as null and void, many acts made by the, many policies, many measures administrative which was made by our executive as being null and void if it was not followed properly by the whoever is the administrator, whether it's a vice chancellor, registrar, or the government of India, as null and void. So, we also have a certain amount of limitations, certain amount of powers given to the judiciary in our country, and with that judicial powers and independent positions and security of tenure, security of various other issues, they have to be provided housing, they have to be provided all the various allowances, they have to be provided transport, so that they do not become in their life dependent on anybody for anything, so that they do not feel in any way looking forward to any types of benefits or facilities in life. So, all facilities are provided to them and all respect is given to them. No filthy remarks or flippant remark is ever made against the judiciary, so that the judiciary's dignity in office is maintained. So, we do not normally make any sort of a remark against judiciary, because the judiciary can call you up and then say you have brought undignified remarks against us, which is wrong, can even punish them. Contempt, what we call this is contempt of court. So, neither cabinet nor executive nor legislature nor very ordinary citizens in this country can say or do something which is construed as a contempt of court by the judiciary. So, that we have a very dignified position for the judiciary in our country. So, we have these various types of protection given to the various organs. At the same time, we also have various types of limitations made on these various organs, so that in their interrelationship or in the performance of their duties, the various portions or parts of the government perform them within the limits which democracy really gives them, and following the checks and procedures and balances, so that no one exceeds and no one has a tendency to become autocratic. Now, we have over a period of time very many occasions and very many challenges, particularly in our country. There are many examples like this in various parts of the world, but today we will take up only the type of controversies and arguments and debates which has happened in this country in this particular context. That is why the Constitution, a study of the Constitution, understanding of the Constitution, the spirit of the Constitution becomes extremely important for even an ordinary citizen in this country, because we must know what are the limits, what are the types of norms which India has adopted over the past 60 years. There are traditions and norms which have been established in the past 60 years, even in a new country like India. We try to adopt those traditions, we try to follow those traditions, so that we can operate our institutions with a certain amount of a dignified way without unnecessary controversies, and allow the functioning of the government effectively, and at the same time protecting the rights of the people. So, this is where we have, for instance, one very important issue which has come up over a period of time, the relationship between the President and the Prime Minister. Not merely the powers of the cabinet, power relationship between the Prime Minister and the cabinet ministers, Prime Minister and the legislature, cabinet ministers and the legislature, but within the executive itself we have two authorities in India. One is the President, other is the Prime Minister and the cabinet. Now, one is formal. The President is a formal authority given by the Constitution itself, and his powers and functions are very clearly spelt out by the Constitution. And he is entrusted as the head of the executive, head of the government, head of the state. But in practice, what we adopted was the President by himself cannot rule this huge country. So, the President is helped, assisted by the advice of the Prime Minister and cabinet. So, the President is aided and advised by a council of ministers. This is what the Constitution says. So, in practice what has become is this council of ministers, which is a huge body, about 60 to 70 members who belong to the legislature, but then this council of ministers in turn makes into a smaller committee of his, which is the cabinet. This cabinet in turn is supposed to aid and advise the President, whom the President can consult in running the country. But over a period of time in Britain, what has happened was this committee has become powerful, because the British government adopts a monarchical government. They do not have a president, they only have a king. And the king comes not by election, but the king or queen comes by inheritance rights. Could be very effective, could be very weak and imbecile, because it is an inheritance. So, what they have done over a period of time, this committee from the Council of Ministers has got more and more powers to itself to run the government as such. When we became independent, we adopted this model. So, we have a president, but we also have a cabinet, and the cabinet really runs the country as the real executive. So, president becomes a formal executive, cabinet becomes the actual real executive. So, president is the head of the government, but the cabinet is also head of the de facto executive in our country. So, we have de jure and de facto, two types of models, and cabinet becomes. So, sometimes it is possible, because both of them are anyway elected bodies in our country. Unlike the British monarch, here we are having a president who is also elected, though very indirectly elected, though by a very complicated procedure he is elected, but he is elected. So, he is also a representative of the people in a way, like the cabinet and the legislature is. So, there are occasions we have had over a period of time when the controversy has erupted, who is more powerful, who is more democratic, who represents the people more, who keeps the interest of the nation alive by his responsibility. It keeps coming up. So, we also have very often a sort of a friction, a tension, stress, which comes up between the President and the Prime Minister. You had in the past few times between Indira Gandhi, even starting with Nehru and President Rajendra Prasad. When it came to the Hindu reform laws, Nehru wanted to go headlong and make radical reforms, but the President of India, Rajendra Prasad, put an end to it by saying he is opposed to this sort of Hindu reforms. So, what Nehru had to do, ultimately concede to the President, divide this into various forms of small acts rather than a big reform and amendment to the Constitution and all that, and finally get the consent of the President for small bills and not the big reform legislation as such, because the President really threatened to veto it. So, any bill which is passed by the legislature with the cabinet included in it will have to get the signature of the President before it becomes a law. But if the President refuses to give the thing or has some objection to the bill, he can send it back to the legislature, but if the legislature passes it again, then the President will have to sign. So, Nehru also could have done it. He could pass it again and send it back to the President, and President would have to sign it, but he did not do it. To keep the dignity of office, not to make too many stress and strain in the very beginning of our Indian government, he quietly obeyed the President's will and then found out various other methods, strategies to pass those Hindu reform bills, which brought up a lot of liberal reforms for the women of Hindu women in this particular country. And so also we have subsequently little controversy between President Zail Singh and Rajiv Gandhi, between Indira Gandhi and the president, and many other instances where the president expresses a little displeasure to the prime minister, calls him up and tells him, look, I am not in favor of this, look, I don't think this is the way it is, look, you will have to look into this. Like this, he tries to express that he is still the authority, except we do not normally try to take it to a tension point when it can become then a constitutional crisis. Either the president or the prime minister before that cools down, and finally we have a sort of a compromised type of action which comes from there. So, in theory the president is very strong, but in practice the prime minister has his way if he puts up with a little patience, understanding, respecting the constitution and the president. But usually the prime ministers and the cabinet try to avoid a situation. If it comes to that, they try to withdraw quietly and not push it forward. We have had very many instances of it in our country in the past 60 years, but we have avoided a constitutional breakdown or a real crisis in our country thanks to the compromises which both the authorities have been having it. So, there are very few occasions when really the president exerts the power. 90% of the time he is only going by what we call the advice of the cabinet, which means the cabinet runs. But there are certain times when the president gets it, like if no party has a majority in the legislature, if no leader gets elected by the legislature properly, if they are all equally divided, or if there is a minority, nobody gets a majority at all, no party. There are occasions we have had like this. Or a government or a party which has had a majority support in legislature then loses it, reduces itself to a minority position. At such times, the president really comes into operation. His powers are tested, his wisdom is put to practice. And so, it is occasion when president calls. The same is true about the governors in the states. More often the governors have played this role. We haven't had a big occasion like that for the prime president and the prime minister in the central government of India, but then he has this power and he can do it if it comes to a crisis situation of that nature. We have another example in this president parliament or president legislative, president cabinet, president prime minister relationship. This is a very notorious one, namely the declaration of emergency in this country. In 1975, we declared an emergency in this country. The ruling party and its leaders believed that the country is being visited by a lot of agitations, and people are appealing to various people, including the army, to violate the constitution, to come up and establish a lot of opposition in various parts of India against price rise. So, the government really felt it was not able to control the situation, so it wanted to declare an emergency. Emergency declaration has certain limitations given by the constitution. There are certain conditions under which only you can impose an emergency. So, it becomes very doubtful whether those conditions we really had it in 1975 to warrant an emergency. So, those becomes doubtful whether a president who will go by the constitution or later on a judiciary which goes by the constitution will really approve this particular declaration of the emergency. But the cabinet went through it and the cabinet wanted to declare the emergency. The cabinet approved the emergency, only one person dissenting it, but that was sort of overlooked, and went to the president for a declaration. The president definitely signed it, there was no problem, about it. But then the procedure by which the president was made to sign this is something which has become a controversy, political controversy in our country. Of course, nobody knows except the 4-5 persons who might have gone to the president to get the bill signed, and perhaps president secretary. But it is said that the president was reluctant, unhappy about the situation, but he was coerced or persuaded to sign the emergency, and he signed it. Unfortunately, the president died very soon after this signature. So, one does not even know the history behind it and how he felt about it, but this is one occasion when we have a situation where it almost led to a crisis in our country. We have subsequently a lot of writings which have come. The other agency which could have stopped the emergency declaration is judiciary. Judiciary also can interpret the constitution, go through the constitution and see whether that particular situation could have been prevented, emergency could have been thrown out by the judiciary as being against the constitution. But then what happened? What really happened was many of the judges went by the declaration of the emergency rather than using their powers to check, powers to discuss and powers to, because by that time the emergency had already said fundamental rights are suspended during the period. So, whether the suspension of fundamental rights is right or not itself was a question which we were all thinking about, but then the judiciary went along with that. And before that, something else happened in the judiciary which made it possible, is because what we call the supersession of the judges, Chief Justice of India. Normally, as a tradition then and subsequent years, we make the senior most judge as in the Supreme Court as the Chief Justice of India. Even if it means 6 months, even if it means 3 months, even if it means 3 years, the senior most judge becomes the Chief Justice. But Mrs. Gandhi, as the Prime Minister, appointed somebody who was not so senior, 3 or 4 times younger than the senior most, appointed as the Chief Justice India. This brought in a tremendous amount of controversy in the country. What happens to the independence of the judiciary? What happens to the security of the judiciary? How can the executive interfere with the appointment of the judiciary? How did the president allow this to happen? Because president is the other authority who really appoints them. But somehow president, prime minister, everybody joined up in this to appoint his junior judge as the Supreme Court justice. So, this has created the controversy ever since of how far the judiciary is really independent in this country, or how far the judiciary can stand up by itself. We will take it up later, but the superstition is something which has very much compromised the position of the judiciary, because it was suspected this particular individual who became the Chief Justice of India was more pliable, could be more manipulated by the ruling party and its leader. So, he was made the Chief Justice, and so when the emergency was declared, he was the Chief Justice of India. So, he approved the emergency, and there was no judicial resentment about the emergency, even though maybe personally they felt, but officially nobody declared it. So, the emergency declaration really made the ascendancy of the executive, particularly of the cabinet. By suspending the fundamental rights, by suspending the legislature, by suspending the political parties, by suspending the opposition leaders, the emergency became a time when the executive became most dominant, other 2 organs of the government has been brought down. This is not what the parliamentary democracy is meant to be. This is almost what Lord Acton was fearing, that all the 3 types of powers will come into the one organ, namely the executive, and in that one organ, one person, because there is a political party, there is a party discipline, so parties do not go against it. So, we have had in our country, without going to too many details, that the interference for some time has taken place, but what it shows is this has not become a permanent part of our country. What has become is, in our polity, there have been other types of checks, balances, which has made this. For instance, in the case of the same emergency, it could have been emergency for a long time, there is no limit on that, but the elections were postponed. We could have postponed the election for 2 years, even according to our constitution, but we had it only for 1 year, and then elections were called. So, the emergency declared, it was within the stipulation of the constitution that the elections were postponed and the new elections were held within the constitutionally limited period. And the fact that another election was called and that this particular political party was defeated and its leader itself was defeated showed the strength of parliamentary form of government in our country and the strength of democracy and citizens' participation and citizens' rights. So, the people just overthrew this government and did express the displeasure of the executive powers, executive attendancy. So, that is where we have some of these questions coming up. The most important question which is coming up is judiciary. On the judiciary, there's a lot of role of ideology. We have also got concepts like committed judiciary, committed bureaucracy coming up over a period of time. Committed doesn't mean committed to justice or committed to constitution and committed to values. Committed has come to mean the commitment to a particular political leadership, particular political party, particular political ideology. Because ultimately judges are also human beings, judges also have their biases, judges have also their political views, judges have also their political ideology. We have had some very drastic, radical judges in our Supreme Court who believe that this is what Constitution stands by. They go by the preamble, they go by the fundamental rights of the Constitution, its spirit as well as letter, and have come out with very many radical type of judgments over a period of time, which has been good for the country because that has made the country more liberal, keeping the citizens' point of view. But they have been criticized in practice by the conservative judges as being biased in favor of a party or a person or an ideology. So, we have very often now this is coming up. So, people have begun questioning the judiciary. Not like the old times when nobody would say a word against judiciary. People now have begun questioning the judiciary and calling them as they are biased, they have ideology, they are oriented towards a particular political party, they are reactionary, or on the other side they are very radical, they are very communist oriented, that they are giving radical revolutionary type of judgments. We have begun talking about it, we have begun writing about it. We even had somebody mentioning recently that they are unelected tyrants, because judiciary is still powerful. So, what they say is still very powerful, but they are not elected and they very often go against the elected bodies of executive and legislature. So, people have begun questioning the judiciary, but by and large we do believe the judiciary is performing. It is this sort of criticism against judiciary, and the other important criticism which has come up against judiciary is corruption. A lot of corruption, nepotism charges have come up against judiciary. We don't have to go into details, which has made us begin dabbling with, meddling with the procedure of appointment of the Supreme Court and judges. So, we have a huge controversy raging in the country about how to appoint the judges, whether it is a collegium practice or whether it should be National Judicial Commission practice. These things are not there either in the United States or in Britain or any other country. So, we are looking to some European liberal countries for these methodologies, but then it has become an extremely important controversy in this country, in which judiciary itself and the cabinet itself is getting thoroughly involved with. That is not very nice for a democracy. It is not merely debated among the academics or judicial experts, but is being debated right by the cabinet and the judiciary, with the result it's taking a very controversial look in the country as such, and sometimes one feels that some of these things should have been sorted out more easily. Under corruption, nepotism of the judiciary, very often it is something which the judiciary itself brings upon itself. While the others are political agencies, judiciary is not supposed to be a political agency, and the country still looks forward to judiciary as the final arbiter for any doubts, any arguments, any decision, any rights of the people. We still look forward to the judiciary to decide many of the controversial issues in this country. In the same way, we still look forward to our president of the country. President is still held in this country as a wise old man. If he has any objection, if he has any doubts, if he has very unpleasant feeling about something, we worry about it, because we do want him to play that sort of an above politics, at the same time very wise role as such. And we find very often some of our presidents in the past as well as in the present playing this role. We had President Radhakrishnan long back making statements when he was about to leave the office as to how the role of a president has been curbed. We have president like Abul Kalam, who has given a lot of advice and felt unpleasant when some of his decisions have been rejected overnight without even being considered. We do have our present president, Pranab Mukherjee, Dr. Pranab Mukherjee, who has come out with at least 3-4 times in recent past about the political events and developments in our country, particularly in the context of pluralism, democracy, citizenship, diversity, and the nature of Indian polity as such and democracy as such. So, we do have the presidents not asserting themselves, but at the same time giving vent to how unhappy they are with the country's polity, and then how they are trying to perhaps in their own discreet way advising the powers that be to guide the country, direct the country in the way in which the founding fathers of our constitution really imagined, had a vision.
So, I will disturb you, ma'am, because we are short of time over here.
So, this is the nature of a parliamentary democracy. We are currently going through some sort of a dynamic situation. Thank you.
I hope that more sessions could be carried out in future also on the topic we discussed today. Dear friends, if you have liked this lecture or if you want to give your feedback regarding this particular lecture, then you can mail us at info.cc@nic.in. We would be meeting again very soon and would be discussing more and more. Till then, take care. Goodbye. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so very much.